When you think about bones, what first comes to mind? I guess strength, right? That incredibly sturdy frame holding us all up. But how often do we really stop and consider the bustling hidden world inside them, all that constant quiet activity?
Exactly. The microscopic life that keeps them not just strong, but, well, alive and dynamic.
So today we're embarking on a really fascinating deep dive into the inner workings of bone. We're drawing our insights from the very comprehensive Histology, a text and atlas, 8th edition.
Yeah, our mission is basically to walk you through bone's intricate microscopic structure,
Mm.
reveal its key cellular players, explore the different kinds of bone tissue, and importantly, connect all of that to some crucial clinical insights. We'll look at how structure enables function, touch on some surprising molecular biology, and hopefully paint a picture of what these tissues actually look like under the microscope.
Get ready for some genuine aha moments, I think, about the complex living material that's, well, quite literally holding you up right now. Okay, so let's unpack this a bit. We often picture bones as these, inert, rigid things, but underneath, it's more like a busy city. So what's the first amazing secret? What makes bones so uniquely strong and dynamic?
Well, the really distinguishing feature of bone, what sets it apart, is its mineralized extracellular matrix. And this isn't just simple stiffening, it's primarily calcium phosphate, forming these specific hydroxyapatite crystals. What's fascinating, though, is how they're arranged. These crystals are deposited very precisely around the collagen fibers. It's this highly organized structure that gives bone its extreme hardness, but also, surprisingly, its resilience. It lets it handle huge pressure without just shattering.
Ah, okay. So it's definitely not just about physical support then. It sounds like it has a vital chemical role too.
Absolutely. Beyond just support and protection, bone acts as a critical storage site for minerals, especially calcium phosphate. And these minerals aren't just locked away permanently. They can be mobilized, pulled out of the bone matrix, and into the blood when the body needs them. So this makes bone crucial for the homeostatic regulation of blood calcium levels, keeping those levels just right for nerves, muscles, everything.
Right, right. And what about the rest of the matrix? Beyond the mineral, what are the other sort of building blocks?
So the main structural protein, making up about 90% of the matrix proteins, is type I collagen. That's a scaffold. But the other 10%, the non-collagenous proteins, are really the unsung heroes here. They're not just filler. These are the smart components, absolutely crucial for how bone develops, grows, remodels itself, and even repairs itself. Think of them as like the molecular glue and the signaling system all rolled into one. For example, you've got things like osteonectin. It literally acts as an adhesive, binding the collagen to those strong hydroxyapatite crystals. And others, like protoplanin, are produced by bone cells specifically when the bone is under mechanical stress. It's a signal to adapt.
Wow.
Then there are the really important bone morphogenic proteins, or BMPs. These are powerful signals. They can actually trigger precursor cells, mesenchymal cells, to turn directly into osteoblasts, the cells that build bone. In fact, there's a recombinant human BMP7, it's called OP1, that's used clinically to help induce bone growth after major injuries or surgeries.
That's an incredibly rich active matrix, like a complex little factory constantly working. But can't be empty, right? What are the key cells living in there, the ones doing all the work?
You're absolutely right, it's teeming with cells. Within the matrix are these tiny spaces called lacunae. Think of them like little apartments. And each lacuna houses a mature bone cell, an osteocyte. And this is where it gets really interesting.
Okay, so these osteocytes, they get walled in, basically. But they're not just isolated in their little lacunae, are they? How do they talk to each other?
Precisely. They're not isolated at all. Each osteocyte extends these numerous very thin processes out into even smaller tunnels called canaliculi. These canaliculi snake through the mineralized matrix and connect adjacent lacunae. This allows direct contact and, crucially, communication between osteocytes through specialized channels called gap junctions. So imagine this continuous three-dimensional cellular network, like a living communication web woven throughout the entire bone mass. It lets them coordinate activities over quite large distances within the bone.
That's amazing. Now, besides the osteocytes, our source mentions 4 other key cell types. Can you quickly introduce those?
Yes, definitely. So alongside the osteocytes, we have First, the osteoprogenitor cells. Think of them as the bone stem cells, the precursors. Second, the osteoblasts. These are the active builders secreting the matrix. Third, bone lining cells. These are sort of flattened resting cells that cover bone surfaces when nothing active is happening. And finally, the osteoclasts. These are the big guys, multinucleated cells responsible for breaking down and removing bone tissue resorption.
Let's focus on the osteoblasts for a second. What exactly do they do to form bone? What's that process like?
Okay, so osteoblasts are really versatile circulatory cells. Their main job is producing type I collagen and the other matrix proteins. This initially forms an unmineralized layer called osteoid. But they don't just make the stuff, they also kickstart its hardening. They do this by secreting tiny membrane-bound bubbles, called matrix vesicles, into the osteoid. These vesicles act like seeds for mineral crystals to start forming. If you look under the microscope, active osteoblasts are typically cuboidal, lined up in a neat row against the bone they're forming. And you can usually see a lighter band osteoid between them and the mineralized bone.
Okay, got it. And the osteocytes, once they're embedded, what are their active roles? They sound like they do more than just sit there maintaining things.
Oh, absolutely. They are truly remarkable cells. Osteocytes are metabolically active multitaskers, really. A huge role is in mechanotransduction. Basically, they sense and respond directly to mechanical forces on the bone.
How does that work?
Well, think about it. When you walk, run, lift something heavy, that stress causes the fluid within those tiny canaliculi to flow. This fluid movement generates tiny electrical signals which trigger changes inside the osteocyte, changes in calcium levels, signaling molecules, and ultimately this alters gene expression to promote more bone formation where it's needed most. So the areas of bone under the most stress get reinforced. Your skeleton is constantly adapting to how you use it. They can even do a bit of local remodeling right around their own lacunae.
That's incredible. Our bones are literally listening to how we move.
Now let's switch gears to the osteoclasts. How do they manage to break down something so hard? It seems counterintuitive for keeping bones strong. Right. Osteoclasts are these large, fascinating, multinucleated cells. You usually find them in shallow depressions on the bone surface called resorption bays or house-shaped lacunae. And it's really important to remember where they come from. They fuse together from blood cell precursors, the hematopoietic lineage. Totally different origin from osteoblasts. Their whole life cycle, their differentiation and activation, is tightly controlled by signaling pathways, especially one involving rank and rank-allow. This basically tells them when and where to get to work breaking down bone.
So how does this giant cell actually dissolve hard bone? What does that look like up close?
Well, imagine the osteoclast basically seals itself off against the bone surface it's targeting. It creates a kind of sealed microenvironment.
Like a little digestive chamber.
Exactly. Within this sealed zone, called the clear zone, it has a highly folded membrane called the ruffled border right against the bone. Through this ruffled border, it actively pumps out protons, hydrogen ions, creating a very acidic environment, down to maybe pH 4 or 5, like a tiny pool of strong acid. This local acidity dissolves the mineral component, the hydroxyapatite. At the same time, it releases powerful enzymes, particularly cathepsin K and matrix metalloproteinases, which chew up the collagen and other proteins in the matrix. Once the job in that area is done, the osteoclast usually undergoes apoptosis, programs cell death. It's a very controlled demolition process.
Wow, highly regulated, which must be crucial, right? What happens if that cellular balance gets thrown off, say, in joints?
That brings us to some really important clinical correlations, yeah.
No.
It highlights just how delicate this balance is. Take joint diseases like arthritis. Often this involves a pathological response of the articular cartilage, that smooth cartilage on the ends of bones in a joint. Trauma, or maybe an immune attack like in rheumatoid arthritis, can damage this cartilage. If the damage is bad, the cartilage can actually start to calcify and then get replaced by bone. This can lead to ankylosis, basically. The joint fuses up with bone and you lose movement.
Ouch.
Yeah. And another common one is gout, or gouty arthritis. That's caused by sharp uric acid crystals depositing in the joint space. Really painful, and it can cause significant joint deformation over time.
Okay, so moving from the cells now to the bigger picture, how is bone organized as a whole organ? What are its main parts beyond just the bone tissue itself?
Right, bones as organs are much more complex. They're not just bone tissue. They also contain other connective tissues. Very importantly, hemopoietic tissue. That's the bone marrow where your blood cells are made. Also fat tissue, a rich network of blood vessels, and nerves too. And if it's a bone that forms a freely movable joint, like your knee or elbow, you'll find that smooth hyaline cartilage capping the ends.
And the bone tissue itself, you mentioned there are two main types. where the macroscopic view meets the microscopic.
Yes, exactly. Bone tissue is classified primarily as either compact bone, which is dense and solid, or spongy bone, also called cancellous bone. If you imagine cutting a long bone lengthwise, you'd see that solid outer shell of compact bone. But the inside is filled with this amazing, intricate meshwork of bony struts called trabeculae. Looks like a sponge.
Yeah.
All the spaces in that spongy bone are filled with marrow and blood vessels. It's a design that gives strength, but minimizes weight. Very efficient.
So the architecture, the mix of compact and spongy, varies depending on the bone's overall shape and job.
Precisely. Bones are grouped by shape. Long bones, like in your limbs, have that shaft, the diaphysis, and the expanded ends, the epiphysis. Then you have short bones, like in your wrist or ankle. Flat bones, like in your skull, are like a sandwich, 2 layers of compact bone with spongy bone called diploe in the middle. And finally, irregular bones, like your vertebrae, which have complex shapes designed for specific functions.
What covers the outside of the bone and what lines all those internal cavities?
The outside is covered by the periosteum. It's a tough, fibrous connective tissue sheath. And crucially, it contains those osteoprogenitor cells needed for growth and repair. Where ligaments and tendons attach, their collagen fibers, called Sharpie's fibers, actually penetrate right into the bone matrix, anchoring them very strongly. Inside, lining the marrow cavity and covering the trabeculae of spongy bone, is the endosteum. It's usually much thinner, maybe just 1 cell layer thick, but it also has those vital osteoprogenitor cells. And the spaces, as we said, contain bone marrow. It can be red marrow, actively making blood cells, or yellow marrow, which is mostly fat. Yellow marrow can actually convert back to red marrow if needed, like after severe blood loss.
So definitely not just a solid block. It's this intricate, porous, living structure. Microscopically, what does the mature, organized bone look like? The compact bone, specifically.
Okay, so mature compact bone is largely made up of these repeating cylindrical units called osteons, or Herversian systems. Under the microscope, they look like tiny targets or tree rings. You see these concentric layers called lamellae of bone matrix surrounding a central canal. That central canal is the osteal canal, or Herversian canal, and it contains the blood vessels and nerves supplying that osteon.
And those tiny connections for the osteocytes, the canaliculae we talked about, how do they fit into this osteon structure?
Yes, perfect question. The canaliculi radiate outwards from each lacuna where the osteocyte lives towards that central Herversian canal. This is absolutely essential for getting nutrients to the osteocytes and taking waste away, keeping them alive deep within the hard matrix. Now, between the osteons, you find oddly shaped fragments of lamellae. These are called interstitial lamellae. They're basically remnants of older osteons that got partially resorbed during remodeling. And then running around the entire outer and inner circumference of the bone shaft, you have broad layers called circumferential lamellae.
Okay, so how do blood vessels get from the surface into these Herversian canals?
Through perforating canals, also known as Volkmann canals. These run roughly perpendicular to the Herversian canals, connecting them to each other and to the vessels on the periosteal, outer, and endosteal inner surfaces. A key difference is that Volkmann canals are not surrounded by concentric lamellae like Herversian canals are. And generally, the blood supply in bone flows outwards, from the marrow cavity towards the periphery, centrifugal flow.
You mentioned earlier that bone first forms as immature bone. How is that different from this highly organized, mature lamellar bone?
Right. Immature bone, also called woven bone, is the first type formed, like in a developing fetus or during fracture repair. It looks quite different microscopically. Its collagen fibers are arranged randomly in an interlacing or woven pattern, not in those neat lamellae. Immature bone also tends to have more cells per unit area, and the cells themselves are arranged more randomly. It also has more ground substance initially. What's really key is that it forms much faster than mature bone. Even in adults, you still find pockets of woven bone where active remodeling is happening, like in tooth sockets. That constant remodeling is why braces work the bone around the teeth is adaptable.
Fascinating. So how do we actually get from those initial cells and matrix to a fully formed bone? What are the processes of bone formation?
Well, bone formation or ossification happens through 2 main routes: intramembranous ossification and endochondral ossification. The big difference between them is whether or not the bone develops from a pre-existing cartilage model.
Okay, so which bones form without a cartilage model first, directly from connective tissue?
That's intramembranous ossification. It forms the flat bones of the skull and face, the mandible, your lower jaw, and the clavicle collarbone. It starts with mesenchymal cells clustering together in the embryonic connective tissue. These clusters are called ossification centers. These cells differentiate into osteoblasts, and they just start secreting osteoid right there. As it mineralizes, the osteoblasts get trapped and become osteocytes. Initially, you get these small, irregular spicules of woven bone forming a spongy network. Then, through ongoing growth and remodeling, compact bone forms on the outer surfaces, and the center remains as spongy bone.
Okay, so that's direct formation. The other process, endochondral ossification, sounds more complex because it starts with cartilage. How does that work for, say, a long bone?
It is a bit more complex, yes. Endochondral ossification is how most of our bones form limbs, vertebrae, the base of the skull. It begins with those mesenchymal cells first forming a hyaline cartilage model that's basically a miniature version of the future bone.
What's the very first sign of actual bone forming on this cartilage model?
A really critical early event is the formation of a periosteel bony collar around the middle of the shaft, the diaphysis of the cartilage model. Cells in the surrounding membrane, the perichondrium, turn into osteoblasts and lay down this collar of bone. Following that, the cartilage cells, the chondrocytes, right in the center of the shaft, start to enlarge. They become hypertrophic, and the cartilage matrix around them calcifies. This calcification cuts off their nutrient supply, so the chondrocytes die, leaving behind cavities within the calcified cartilage.
Ah, so the cartilage basically sets the stage and then gets replaced.
Exactly. Blood vessels then grow into these cavities, bringing mesenchymal stem cells with them. These stem cells differentiate into osteoblasts, which then start depositing actual bone matrix onto the remnants of the calcified cartilage framework. This whole area in the shaft is the primary ossification center. Later on, usually after birth, similar processes happen in the ends of the bone, the epiphyses. These are the secondary ossification centers.
So, thinking about kids growing taller, how do the long bones actually increase in length? Is it that cartilage again?
Absolutely. Longitudinal growth depends entirely on the epiphyseal cartilage, or the growth plate. This is a plate of hyaline cartilage located between the diaphysis shaft and the epiphysis end. It persists throughout childhood and adolescence. Within this plate, you see distinct zones. A zone where cartilage cells are resting, then a zone where they rapidly divide and line up in columns, then a zone where they enlarge, hypertrophy, then a zone where the matrix calcifies, and finally a zone where the cartilage is resorbed and replaced by bone from the diaphyseal side. The plate itself stays roughly the same thickness during growth because cartilage production keeps pace with cartilage replacement by bone. But the result is that the epiphysis gets pushed further and further away from the diaphysis, making the bone longer.
Right, and bone isn't just growing. You mentioned it's constantly remodeling, even when we're adults. It's not static once it's formed.
That's absolutely correct. Bone is in a constant state of flux throughout life. This is carried out by bone remodeling units. These units are basically coordinated teams of osteoclasts and osteoblasts working together. In compact bone, remodeling involves osteoclasts drilling a tunnel, called a resorption cavity or cutting cone, through the existing bone. Then, following right behind them, osteoblasts come in and start laying down new concentric lamellae, filling the tunnel in from the outside inwards, eventually forming a brand new osteon. This continuous turnover allows bone to adapt its shape to changing stresses, repair microdamage, and replace older bone tissue.
It's really incredible how resilient bone is, too, able to repair itself after something major, like a fracture. What's the mechanism behind that healing?
Indeed. Bone has a remarkable capacity for self-repair. It can happen through direct healing, sometimes called primary healing, if the fracture ends are perfectly stabilized, often surgically. Then it's mostly internal remodeling bridging the gap.
But more commonly, like with a cast, that's indirect healing.
Right.
What are the steps there?
Yes, indirect healing, or secondary healing, is more common and involves forming a callus. It's a fascinating sequence. First, when the bone breaks, blood vessels rupture, forming a fracture hematoma, a big blood clot around the break. This stabilizes things initially. Second, this clot is gradually invaded and replaced by granulation tissue, new connective tissue rich in capillaries and fibroblasts. Inflammation is key here. Third, this granulation tissue then transforms into a fibrocartilaginous soft callus. Cells from the periosteum and endosteum differentiate into chondroblast, making cartilage that bridges the gap, providing some stability.
Okay, so it gets stabilized first with cartilage.
Right. Then fourth comes the bony hard callus. Osteoprogenitor cells become active osteoblasts and start depositing woven bone within and around the soft callus. The cartilage itself calcifies and is replaced by bone, similar to endochondral ossification. This hard callus eventually makes the fracture site mechanically stable, enough to bear weight again. But it's not done yet. The fifth and final stage is extensive remodeling. The bulky woven bone of the hard callus is gradually resorbed and replaced with stronger, lamellar bone, restoring the bone's original shape and strength and reestablishing the marrow cavity. It's quite a process.
Wow, this deep dive has truly shown bone as this incredibly dynamic living tissue. But maybe the most surprising thing is its role as an endocrine organ, secreting hormones. That's not typically what comes to mind.
It certainly isn't, but it's true. Bone is a major player in mineral homeostasis, especially calcium. Maintaining normal blood calcium levels is critical, and it's tightly regulated, mainly by two hormones acting on bone. First, there's parathyroid hormone, PTH, from the parathyroid glands. If blood calcium gets too low, PTH kicks in. It acts indirectly to stimulate both osteocytes and osteoclasts to resorb bone, releasing calcium back into the blood. And second, working in opposition, is calcitonin from the thyroid gland. If blood calcium gets too high, calcitonin is released, and it primarily acts to inhibit osteoclast activity, reducing calcium release from bone.
So what happens if this delicate hormonal balance is significantly disrupted? What are the consequences for bone health?
Well, a major consequence, and a very common one, is osteoporosis. Literally means porous bone. It's a systemic disease where you have progressive loss of bone mass and density and deterioration of the bone's microarchitecture. Essentially, it results from an imbalance where bone resorption by osteoclasts outpaces bone formation by osteoblasts. This makes the bones weak, brittle, and much more susceptible to fractures. It's particularly common in postmenopausal women because estrogen levels drop, and estrogen normally helps keep osteoclast activity in check.
So the health of our bones is really tied into our whole body's chemistry, not just mechanics.
Exactly. And it goes even further. Beyond just responding to hormones like PTH and calcitonin, bone cells produce their own hormones. It's a true endocrine organ. For instance, osteocytes produce fibroblast growth factor 23, FGF23. This hormone acts on the kidneys to help regulate phosphate levels in the blood, and osteoblasts produce osteocalcin. This hormone seems to be involved in energy metabolism, acting on distant targets like fat cells and the insulin-producing beta cells in the pancreas. These are acting just like classic endocrine hormones, influencing other organs and systems. It really broadens our view of what bone does.
So putting it all together,
Yeah.
the seemingly simple, solid structure of bone is actually this bustling metropolis, full of cells, complex chemistry, intricate feedback loops, constantly adapting. We've really taken quite a deep dive into bone today, from that mineralized matrix and the amazing cellular network through its formation, growth, constant remodeling, and repair, and even uncovering its surprising role as a vital endocrine organ.
Yeah, what's really striking, I think, is how this tissue we perceive as rigid and static is actually this constantly remodeling living system. It's incredibly sensitive to its mechanical environment, and it even influences organs far away through its own hormones. It completely challenges that old idea of the skeleton just being inert scaffolding.
It really makes you think about the incredible, almost hidden complexity going on inside us all the time. So after all this, what stands out most to you about our amazing skeletal system? Maybe how something so strong is also so delicately balanced by all these molecular signals.
Or perhaps how the simple act of moving, just walking around, directly influences its strength and density through mechanotransduction. It's a constant conversation between our lifestyle and our bones. There's always more to learn, more to appreciate about the human body.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating world of bone. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep getting well informed.